We're going to go live right now. We're getting an update from federal officials on the situation regarding wildfires. Let's listen in.
On the front lines and impacted the most by the threat of wildfires. And of course, many First Nations leaders will tell you, as Minister Blair has said, that this has been the most severe season that they've seen and in recent memory. Indigenous Services is working very closely with First Nations communities. We've provided ongoing support through the Emergency Management Program. That includes things like significant help for travel, evacuation, accommodations, nursing, mental health supports, and a variety of other kinds of logistics supports on the ground as First Nations communities require them. I regularly am in communication with the variety of leaders that are affected and working on keeping communities safe and increasingly considering the return to community and the inevitable rebuild for some of the communities that have had damaged infrastructure. Je suis en communication régulière avec les chefs des communautés affectées et j'ai parlé avec le chef Picard de l'APN Québec des évacuations récentes. I also would like to thank all of the first responders and First Nations firefighters, many of whom are on the front lines with their provincial and territorial counterparts. On continue à suivre de près la situation et on salue la résilience des communautés affectées. I do want to share a couple of positive updates. Of course, on Friday afternoon, my office rapidly responded to a wildfire risk at Fort Albany First Nation, and working with Chief Elizabeth Cataquapit, the Government of Canada was able to deploy water bombers within a couple of hours and prevent the situation from worsening and to protect some of the infrastructure in the community. Au Québec, le risque a diminué.
Quebec, the risk has gone down, and the First Nations are starting to return to their communities.
And Indigenous Services will continue to work with communities through a self-determination lens to ensure communities have the supports, the resources, and the human resources as communities that are affected begin the assessment process to return, as well as to continue to manage the fire season in this most extraordinary time. Thank you. Merci.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. That's a run and joke. Bill said beforehand, he said, we're not going to be short, but we'll try to be brief. So it's, look, thank you for the chance to connect. Obviously, coming from one of the jurisdictions that's been impacted, this is something I've been watching very closely over the past few weeks. The scenes have been apocalyptic, frankly, when the wildfires initially broke out, thanks to the extraordinary work of our firefighters, including a significant number of volunteer firefighters. No one yet has perished in Nova Scotia as a result of the disaster. So I want to give a huge thank you to those who are actually on the front lines. In addition to my role as helping liaise with the provincial government in Nova Scotia and across the federal government, there is certain news we have to share when it comes to an immigration response, which may not come naturally to a lot of folks. Today I wanted to share with you there's three measures that we're putting forward. The first is to issue free travel documents that might have been destroyed by the fire. There's people who may have lost passports, permanent residency cards, citizenship documents, or other travel documents. Those documents will be replaced through a free and facilitative process in the days ahead to the extent anyone's been impacted. Second, to the extent that any workers who had an employer-specific work permit has been impacted as a result of their employer being closed as a result of the fire, we're offering extensions to their temporary status to make sure that the disaster has not caused them to lose status in Canada. Similarly, though we don't know the extent to which people are impacted, to the extent students have been impacted and their academic year may have been compromised as a result of missed classes, we'll have the opportunity to extend their status for those who have a status that expires before the 30th of September. Making sure that these disasters don't displace people who are on a specific kind of work permit is something that I think is incredibly important. Finally, in the next few days, we expect to see additional contingents of firefighters arriving from international firefighting services. We expect over the next couple of days to see nearly 100 additional firefighters from Chile and Costa Rica, and the following day approximately 240 from Spain and Portugal. Our team at IRCC has been working over the weekend to ensure that all of the visas are processed and issued for those who are seeking to come, and the good news is approximately the number that I just shared have now been processed, and in the next few days we expect to see, as a result, nearly 340 additional firefighters arrive in Canada to help with the wildfires that continue to burn. Just a thought, given my experience a few years ago. There were teams from Canada, including Nova Scotia, who showed up in Australia to help with the blazes that you'll all remember being in the news back then. And we were incredibly proud to see that the world community has stepped up to respond in kind, knowing that we're all in this together, is a sign of good faith at a time when it's very much needed. And if I could offer a concluding thought, the people standing with me today, notably Anita, to deploy the Canadian Armed Forces so rapidly and to say yes at every request, to Bill behind me, who's been extraordinary to respond in a timely way to all of my calls and to deal with the provincial government, and of course to Patty for her extraordinary defense of Indigenous peoples in this country, and continuing to offer the federal government's response to support them in the time of need is most welcome. So to my colleagues standing with me, as a Nova Scotian, I'm just sincerely grateful. Thank you. With that, I will hand it over to Minister Anand.
Thank you so much, Minister Fraser, and good afternoon.
We've been getting an update from federal officials on the ongoing efforts to fight wildfires across the country.
And federal officials are providing an update on the wildfires across the country. Let's continue to listen in.
Of international firefighters have arrived in Alberta, and we will continue to work hand in hand with the province to keep Albertans safe. And I want to echo Minister Fraser, Minister Blair, and Minister Haidu that we are so grateful to all of our first-line responders as well as the Canadian Armed Forces for all the work that they are doing across our country. Now, let me conclude by saying across the country, this is a very difficult time for many of our communities. Et le gouvernement fédéral et les forces armées canadiennes vont continuer.
Forces will continue to do everything that is needed to ensure your safety.
Armed Forces member involved in these operations, and to your loved ones, thank you. Merci du fond du cœur. You represent the very best of Canada, and together we will continue to fight these fires and to keep communities across this country safe. Merci beaucoup.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for a few questions, but we're going to have to go into those very soon.
Was there any part of the government to maybe establish a federal fleet of water bombers that can be used across the country in times of a crisis like this?
There are actually a significant number of assets that are water bomber assets that are available here in Canada. They're coordinated in how they respond and where they respond by the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, and we work very closely with them. And we're very fortunate in this country as well that we could draw upon additional resources from private vendors and from other governments. The United States, as an example, in our conversations with FEMA, made a number of water bombers and personnel and other equipment available through their National Interagency Forest Fire Centre, NIFC, and to the Canadian agency, and we've been able to deploy those results well. But having said that, we'll learn from this experience, and we'll look at making sure we are already making very significant investments that Mr. Wilkinson announced last week in training additional firefighter resources and also acquiring new equipment. And we'll learn from our experience in here, and when we make future investments, to make sure that Canada has the capacity to respond. And as Mr. Fraser also indicated, we send resources to other countries to assist during their wildfire season, and they reciprocate by supporting us during ours. We're very grateful for that relationship and the great work, quite frankly, that CIFC does in coordinating those resources across the country.
Is it time now for a national wildfire fighting service that can respond to these across the country unilaterally?
Well, let me just sort of point out that the response for wildfires has historically always been with the provinces and territories, local authorities, and they have the resources, and it has always been the responsibility of the federal government to provide support and assistance when the situation in any province exceeds the capacity of that province to deal with it. And so there are literally thousands of firefighters already deployed in the provinces, and we don't want to lose that incredible resource and that utility, but we are always looking for ways, working with the provinces and territories, on how we can better support them in their firefighting efforts. And as well, we're looking at investments that we can make in training additional firefighters, bringing greater levels of coordination and having better access to the equipment they need when and where they need it. But right now, we are looking at a number of different models that could be useful. We're talking with some of our international partners as well to improve that coordination. But I don't want to fail to recognize and acknowledge the incredible work that the provinces, territories, ways local fire departments, municipal and volunteer, right across the country do in fighting these fires every year. And so our job really has been there to support them, and we'll find new and better ways to continue to support them.
Minister Fraser, how many international firefighters are waiting for their visas to be approved right now?
So far as I'm aware of the numbers that I shared, there are 3 that are waiting to share final details about their own passports, but all of the remaining firefighters who have expressed a desire to come and assist have now been processed to my knowledge.
Mr. Fraser, just on the electronic travel authorizations that you have now granted to more countries, it's caused a surge in demand. A lot of people were not able to get in on them. They weren't able to go to funerals or family vacations. Any sense that your department might be able to compensate these people?
So we've been first making sure that we restore the function of the system. I've been engaged over the course of the weekend with my deputy minister and department, and it appears that we have now stabilized the system, but with the extraordinary surge in demand we saw from certain countries who now have access to the ETA system, we certainly received a concomitant increase in the number of applications that have come in. For what it's worth, although this wasn't your question, it did not impact our ability to issue ETAs or visas as was necessary for people who are coming to fight fires. In terms of next steps, we don't yet understand the impact on certain travelers because the function has been restored within about a day to understand those people who've actually missed out on opportunities as a result of the system being down, where it was the responsibility of the government versus a traveler who maybe tried to apply at the last minute is something we don't yet have a full picture of. So when we come to understand what the consequences may have been for travelers, we'll be better positioned to understand what solutions we may be able to offer.
Why didn't you foresee the surge in demand?
We did foresee a significant surge in demand, but it exceeded the expectations, and within about a 24-hour period, we were able to restore the function of the system. So the system did not fundamentally break, and I want to reassure people that it's functioning now. But just to give you a sense of the scale, over the course of the last few days, it was not uncommon for us to reach or exceed 25,000 ETA applications, disproportionately from the Philippines of the new countries. Though this posed challenges in the first day or so after the system, or the first few days after the system rolled out, the long-term indication is that the system is going to work very well by providing a pathway for people to come visit who have been here before, who followed all the rules, or who are approved to go to the United States without compromising on any of the security screening. This is a really, really helpful thing for the Canadian tourism sector in particular, but to see that the system now has been restored and is able to process this extraordinary volume bodes very well for the future, despite the fact that there was a challenge in the first few days.
Minister Fraser, what's the government's current thinking on a potential pathway to offer some Ukrainians permanent residency under the emergency travel authorization?
Thanks very much for the question. I appreciate it very much. I expect I'll have news to share soon. We've been talking about certain elements to pursue permanent residency for those who have particular family connections in Canada. But in addition, I think it's important to point out that Ukrainians who are here temporarily are going to be eligible for existing streams as well. There's a 3-year permission under the Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel for people to be in Canada, to work in Canada, or to study in Canada. People who have that work experience and are living here will often be able to transition. As we get through the program, the 3-year period under which people have applied through the existing program, we're going to better understand the nature of the needs of the communities. We've been hearing from the Ukrainian community in Canada that family reunification for people who are here now with their families is going to be a priority so they can remain connected to their families, but understanding those who may not have that familial connection and their desire to take part in it is something that we don't yet have a firm read on based on their ability to qualify for existing programs, because I expect many will. So we'll hopefully have news shortly on one portion of the response for permanent residency, and in the not too distant future, over the next year or two, we'll be able to better assess as to whether the existing programs service those needs or whether we need to do further thinking.
On the Indian international students, you paused deportation, I think about 700 of them. Are you taking further steps to make sure that this kind of situation doesn't arise again?
So I expect to have news in the next day or so with a clearer pathway, but rest assured that we've been working hard for weeks, even months, to develop both a solution in the acute phase for people who find themselves impacted, but also a systemic fix in the long term. And just for the sake of clarity, although the initial reports indicated that there were 700 people in this position, the actual number of people that are facing a removal order is a few dozen, and it could grow from there based on investigations that have not yet been completed. But we're going to be working to establish a process where where people who are innocent victims of fraud will be permitted to stay in Canada, and those who did abuse the system and committed fraud against IRCC and the Government of Canada will not be allowed to benefit from that fraud. There's a few final details we need to put in place to make sure that those are not removed in the interim and to make sure that certain people can overcome a 5-year inadmissibility ban. But in the long term, we have work to do to make sure that we work with colleges and universities to verify letters of acceptance, and I expect in the next day or two we'll have more information. Let me just say to students who may have been impacted by this, the mental health toll is not lost on the Government of Canada. We know the stress that comes with people, particularly those who know they've done nothing wrong, is extraordinary. We have been working very hard to come up with a solution to make sure that innocent people are protected, but that the system still protects its integrity and doesn't allow fraudsters.
And that was federal officials providing an update on the wildfires across the country.